Well, welcome to Hacks and Wonks. I'm Crystal Fincher. I'm a political consultant and your host on this live stream tonight. On Hacks and Wonks, we talk with policy wonks and political hacks to gather insight into local politics and policy in Washington state through the lens of those doing the work with behind-the-scenes perspectives on what's happening, why it's happening, and what you can do about it. Be sure to subscribe to Hacks and Wonks to get the full versions of our Tuesday topical show and our Friday Week in Review shows delivered to your podcast feed. Full transcripts and resources in our shows are always available at officialhacksandwonks.com and in our episode notes. Tonight, we're bringing you an insider's view of the recent Washington state primary election results. As political professionals, we always dive deep into the minutiae of campaigns and elections. But why should you, our audience, care about the analysis of campaign pros when it comes to state and local races? The truth is, these elections shape your daily life in ways that you might not realize. From education funding to local infrastructure projects to housing affordability to healthcare, the outcomes of these primaries set the stage for policies that directly impact your community. By bringing together a panel of seasoned political strategists, we're offering you a unique lens through which to view these results. Our experts have been in the trenches, crafting messages, crunching numbers, and reading the electoral tea leaves for years. They'll cut through the noise and spin to give you insights you won't find in typical news coverage. We're excited to be able to live stream this roundtable on YouTube tonight. Additionally, we're recording this and it will be available with a full text transcript on officialhacksandwonks.com. Our esteemed panelists this evening are RIALL Johnson. RIALL is a partner at Prism West. RIALL began working in political campaigns in 2012 after he retired from a 9-year career as a professional football player. His first campaign was as a field organizer in Cincinnati, Ohio for President Obama's re-election campaign, which was also where he started to get involved in politics. His focus has always been on the field side of grassroots campaigns. He's knocked hundreds of doors, thousands of doors for campaigns in 6 different states, organized the collection of over 1 million signatures, and created grassroots volunteer programs that are still self-sustaining today. For the past few years, RIALL has been focusing his work in his home state of Washington and his current residence of California, where he's led impactful campaigns focused on gun violence prevention, police accountability, and criminal justice reform. After directing ballot initiative I-940, RIALL founded Prism West in 2018 to focus on getting progressive candidates of color in office to increase representation in government and bring real transformative policy to fruition. Many of his clients have broken many barriers by becoming the first of their demographic to be elected to their offices. RIALL's currently heavily involved in ballot initiatives in California, such as the recent initiative for statewide rent control and a higher minimum wage for hotel workers. Welcome, RIALL. Next is Stephen PAOLINI. Stephen moved from Orlando to Seattle in the summer of 2016. A few weeks later, the Pulse nightclub shooting devastated his hometown. At the time, it was the deadliest shooting in U.S. history, a record now broken several times over. Heartbroken and pissed off, he joined the campaign to pass Initiative 1491, Extreme Risk Protection Orders, as a regional field director. Gun violence prevention passed on the ballot with 72% of the vote and in every legislative district except for one. What's up, Republic Washington? Over the course of the next few years, Stephen worked and lobbied in the legislature to pass dozens of gun violence prevention legislation, from protections for survivors of domestic violence to high-capacity magazines. On the ballot, he secured victories as the field director for I-940, De-Escalate Washington, to make it possible to prosecute law enforcement for misconduct, and was the campaign manager for I-1639, Safe Schools and Safe Communities to regulate assault rifles statewide. While the program and policy director for Civic Action and associate regional director for ADL, Stephen successfully lobbied for nation-leading overtime protections for workers in Washington, the capital gains tax on windfall profits, justice for victims of doxing and online harassment, compensation for nonprofit organizations, targeted and race-based attacks, and an innovative hotline model for responding to hate, bias, and extremism-related events in Washington and Oregon. Very important. As a campaign operative, Stephen has helped elect candidates at the local, regional, state, and federal level, including current mayor of Tacoma, Victoria Woodard, Seattle Council member Dan Strauss, Congresswoman Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, and many more. He's currently a principal at Bottled Lightning Collective, working across the country to elect and re-elect Democrats in Oregon's North Coast, New Hampshire, North Carolina, and right here at home in Washington. Outside of politics, Stephen serves as the chair of the board for Community Passageways, a community violence intervention organization serving youth and adults in King County and across Washington state. Welcome.
Hey.
And next, we have someone who almost doesn't need an introduction, Heather WEINER, who is just basically a legend in Washington politics. Heather is a recovering lawyer and owner of PowerHouse Strategic, a political communications firm. As a legislative counsel in Washington, D.C., Heather lobbied Congress to protect endangered species and places, including adding nearly 1,000 acres of salmon habitat to Mount Rainier National Park. Heather's won ballot initiative fights from Massachusetts to Nevada to Washington for healthcare, trans rights, and voting rights. She's been part of historic progressive wins, from the very first $15 an hour wage win in SeaTac, to democracy vouchers in Seattle and protecting hotel workers in Seattle, to funding childcare and education through Washington's capital gains tax on mega millionaires and billionaires. She and her team are currently working to defeat two bad initiatives on this November ballot. All those initiatives, statewide initiatives on the November ballot, are bad. She's working on I-2109 and I-2124. Welcome, Heather. Well, this is where we get to start talking about the races. So we just talked about Stephen, his experience working with Congresswoman Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez. So let's start with the congressional races. So in the 3rd congressional district, we have Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez in another race, a rehash of the race that she ran and won last time, against Republican MAGA extremist Joe Kent. Can you kind of brief us on what was at stake in this re-election bid and what turned out in the primary?
Yeah, I don't even know where to start. I mean, that race is a wild one, has always been. And, obviously in 2022, Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez pulls off a massive upset. I think it was the final rating from 538 at the time was something like less than 1% chance that she would win that race. Obviously on the ground, that was not really borne out. I think that's one of those cases of sort of national politics, national polling, creating a narrative that they don't actually have the sort of facts on the ground to verify. But nevertheless, she wins that race by just 2 votes in every precinct, beating back, Joe Kent, who some have asked me this cycle, is he moderating? Is he sort of calming down? I think that's a kind of a similar narrative to Trump, where they try to like spin this sort of conversation of, is he becoming less extreme? The answer is, of course, no. He is just as extreme as he's always been, spinning conspiracy theories on all host of issues. I could use the whole show on that. I won't. But this year, things are looking positive. She won, the primary with about 46% of the vote. Some people have noticed, obviously, that's less than 50. I think important to remind people, she won the primary in 2022 with just 32% of the vote. So she's gained significant traction, even on a primary ballot with another Republican. This is a weird race I consider myself a progressive political consultant. It's obviously a weird race to wrap our heads around, where she wins with 5 to 8% of Republicans, people voting for Donald Trump and then bubbling her name in. And that is a mind bender for me, but it is the truth. And so here, starting at 46%, obviously voter turnout increases in the general. It's a really great place to start. Don't let me fool you, though. Like, this is going to be a nail biter all the way through. I think this race is going to be in that a few hundred vote difference between Marie and Joe, and it's going to come down to every little thing and every piece of the puzzle to continue to win that. Obviously, holding on to that seat, really important for taking back the House, and the impacts that has on people's lives are real.
Yeah, this is major, as you said, major for taking back the House at the federal level. Now, we could spend all day talking about the wild conspiracy theories that we have
Yeah.
heard from Joe Kent, but do you want to just give a couple? Because it's I have found that it's
Yeah.
hard to do justice actually relaying this. We might later on provide some links for people to see it themselves, because it sounds like you're exaggerating when you talk about it, but this is so
Right.
little.
Yeah, no, I mean, 100%. It's like anything I could pick, there's probably another list of things that I could mention. I mean, the top lines, obviously, national ban on abortion, strong supporter of that, no exceptions, rape, incest, whatever you want to say. Not that those, anyway, but 20-year ban on immigration in general is something that he supports, legal and otherwise undocumented. Platforming literal white supremacists and white nationalists. He, still has members of his campaign team that openly associate with white nationalists. The list goes on and on. I mean, he believes their FBI was responsible for the attempted assassination on former President Trump's life. Like, he believes January 6th was an inside job. I mean, like, this is this year, right? This is not 2022 and he's had a huge makeover and somehow he's now moderate Republican John McCain or whatever. Like, he is the same guy he's always been, not even really masking it. I think that desire to sort of see him as moderating is maybe just a little bit of like, sometimes we all wish it were true. Like, I genuinely wish he would be more moderate. It would make a harder race potentially for us, but nevertheless better for the country. That is just not the case. He continues to have these extreme beliefs and really out of touch, obviously, with his district, although clearly in touch with a portion of the Republican base. And, that's challenging. But
So what needs to happen in the general election for Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez to secure re-election?
yeah, I mean, for starters, I think turnout needs to be a lot higher than we saw in the primary. We've had really historically low turnout, right? We're looking at kind of like low 30% turnout in that district. That needs to be a lot higher. It needs to be closer to 60% for us to be able to pull out a victory again. And we have to walk this tightrope. I mean, I think it's the good thing about Congresswoman Perez is that she's her own person and she is really true to her district. I mean, she's somebody who lives in a home that she built herself. She gets her water from a well that she dug. She gets her internet, from radio that she set up. Like, this is a person that truly lives in her district. This is not somebody who is like owns a rich mansion and is like, not in touch with the life of the people that live in her district. And for better or for worse, I think that informs in an authentic way this ability for her to kind of run a tight walk where she is earning the vote of 10% of Republicans. And that may not make us happy in Seattle as progressive Democrats, but it is necessary to win this district. There's no math to sort of do a progressive turnout project to win in the 3rd congressional district. It is unfortunately a race where you have to win a lot of moderates, a lot of independents, a lot of Republicans, hopefully without compromising your values to an extreme point. And that's always the balance and the encouragement as, a team to Marie, to not let that like make you somebody you're not, not let that sort of pull you to where there isn't a difference between you and the other candidates. Luckily, I don't think we're at risk of that with there's no difference between Marie and Joe, but certainly, she continues to do a good job, I think, of by and large, focusing on how can she improve the lives of people in her district in an authentic way while speaking to those moderates that do believe, in country over party.
Now, I want to talk about the 6th congressional district race, which was an open seat race to replace outgoing Congressman Derek Kilmer, highly esteemed in that district, very popular in that district. But this is a competitive open seat. We had Emily Randall, as well as DNR head Hillary Franz, running a competitive race on the Democratic side. And then on the Republican side, we have State Senator Drew McEwen. When you're looking at this race, RIALL, how did you see this shaping up, and what were your takeaways in the result here?
I'm surprised that I mean, as a casual observer, you would think that Hillary Franz, the statewide, elected, would be the front runner and make it through here. So, as a progressive, I guess we should be happy that Emily Randall made it through instead. So it's interesting and ironic, like Hillary ran for governor and then just said, no, instead I'm going to run for this seat instead. And so it kind of, I think it affected voters. It looked kind of inauthentic and opportunistic. So I think that reflected. And I think Emily Randall came off as a more authentic candidate among the Democrats. So I think that was what made the difference. I think it was just kind of a little overconfident in her name recognition and fundraising ability to think that she could switch those lanes that in the middle of the race, and also saying, no, I'm just going to go. So it's like kind of like running for office just to run for office instead of actually trying to do that. So I think that was the difference, in my opinion, just from saying like, well, like if you knew the history, it's like she just decided to like run for governor, spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in this race, and then transferred over to a congressional race, and think that like voters weren't going to notice. So I think in a general that might have worked, like the general election more casual with name recognition, but this is a primary. The voters, people that vote in those issues are a little more knowledgeable, so I think they just saw that as a more authentic candidate, and and I think that made the difference.
I think you're right, Rial. And Emily Randall was a state senator who worked grassroots really hard in order to win that state Senate seat. So the folks in Gig Harbor already had her name recognition, knew who she was, knew that she was a hard worker. She's renowned for excellent constituent services. So I'm sure that really helped. I don't know if folks know, but Emily Randall was actually an organizer with Planned Parenthood. So she knows how to work the ground. So I was also pleasantly surprised at how well Emily did. I was a little bit confused about why there was a Bitcoin independent expenditure for Emily. Seems like Randall and Franz had the same positions on Bitcoin, so I'm not really sure if they just, like Bitcoin people do, took a bet and decided to bet on Randall and saw that she was going to win and decided to put some money behind her. I thought that was a little bit odd. And if anybody knows what happened there, let us know. Because Randall doesn't seem, in my experience, knowing Emily the way that I do, doesn't really seem like her MO to be heavy into Bitcoin. No, that was weird. But otherwise, it was a pleasant surprise. And I think I think also the excitement that people have over the new presidential ticket really translated into some great voter turnout among progressives that we normally don't see during the primary.
Yeah, I think you are both spot on with that. As we look in the general election with this matchup between Emily Randall and Drew McEwen, what do you think needs to happen in this race for Emily to be able to wind up ahead?
I think she needs to connect McEwen to Trump. And just needs to raise money. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead, Rob.
I think she's got some smooth sailing overall, but I want to just also say, like, I think with these congressional races, I think we do need to. We can't just let all these politicians off the hook about the issue, the Israel-Palestine situation. I think these are federal offices; they vote on this funding. Emily Randall pissed off a lot of progressives with her stance, and I think it's it may not be a big factor, but it's something that needs to be addressed. I think we need to know what, as progressives, need to know what they stand on these issues, because they're going to be taking these votes that are going to directly affect the war and the genocide that's happening in Palestine. So that's just that's of course still that's a lot of on the left. It could be called divisive, but like I think it's a valid position and a valid question, and we need to pressure these electeds during that. And the Republicans probably don't care, so it probably won't affect. Like you're going to choose the Democrat that you may have hope that they're going to vote for a ceasefire and end this conflict. But like we still need to make sure that voice is heard and that we still pressure these congressional seats and all 10 of them in the whole state.
That's such a good point, Rob. I just want to add in on that piece and throw out one other point, which is to start with as well, she has a huge advantage. This was a huge advantage in the primary as well. Planned Parenthood is by far the strongest political brand in Washington state. I mean, I've seen polling on this pretty consistently. Doesn't matter what district you're in, Planned Parenthood is extremely trusted, extremely credible with voters. And so being somebody that has held a really powerful role within Planned Parenthood, who has proven their mettle on abortion rights, is just, in a general election, in a primary, whatever race you're in, like that is gold in politics. There are very few political brands that are even close to as meaningful in the minds of voters as Planned Parenthood is in this state and a lot of other places. But to RIALL's point as well, I think part of what makes that issue so tough in this race is a couple of things. One, I think there was a genuine feeling of betrayal among progressives on her position. I think people, whether it was an assumption or whether it was something that she directly communicated on, I don't know. I wasn't have that. I've had some conversations with progressive legislators that felt like she said one position to them about Israel and Palestine, that she expressed desire, for a ceasefire, and then they were really surprised to see that pivot happen. I think it's obviously important to point out it's under duress. I mean, in this country, AIPAC is consistently one of the largest spenders. Pro-Israel lobby in congressional campaigns. The reality of, if I'm in her shoes looking at a primary, similar to sort of the Bitcoin, independent expenditure that was about $1.5 million, that's more than any of the candidates raised. AIPAC could have added a few zeros to that. Like, not even ironically, they could have put $20 million into the race overnight if they felt that there was a material difference between the two candidates. And so, does that make it better or worse? I'm not sure, to be honest. But I do think RIALL's point's really well taken, which is that, for her to continue to mobilize progressives, there's going to be some real questions about her position on that and finding the right balance. And I don't think that these issues need to be sort of all or nothing per se, but I think that's important for her to address. So just agreeing with your point there, RIALL.
Yeah, I think it shows that they could be influenced by money, whether they're getting it or not, which is like, what's the difference? That, like, if they're scared of it or if they're taking it, if they're influenced by it, then I think that's going to, I mean, she came off as a more authentic candidate, and I think that's going to, maybe that will come. I like to test politicians that way. I like to question that, to say, where does your stance, what is, and how resolute is your stance? Is money going to sway your stance? Then why are we voting for you? And I think that is overall, that's why you see the uncommitted campaigns gaining momentum, because it's like, what's the point of us voting for you if you're just going to sell us out, just to stay in office or for the money. So I think that's, that needs to be addressed, and hopefully people in that district, press her on it, because I think we need more people standing up to these lobbyists in Olympia. I mean, in DC and Olympia too, but definitely DC as well.
Now, I want to talk about the statewide races. Normally, when we talk about statewide races, we would start talking about the governor, but there is still a statewide race that is undetermined still on Monday after Election Day. We schedule this live stream always the Tuesday after Election Day, a full week. We're going to know who's there by now. We still cannot call this race for Commissioner of Public Lands. This is a race that has Jamie Herrera Butler on the Republican side, along with Sue Kuehl-Peterson, who are both Republicans and fairly well known across the state. And on the Democratic side, you have several candidates: Kevin Vandeweghe, Patrick DePoe, and Dave Upthegrove, being who most people thought going into this would be the three top Democratic candidates. Really, we had a situation where Democratic votes were spread widely among 5 different Democratic candidates here. And in Washington's top 2 primary system, where just the top 2 vote getters, regardless of party, make it through, as opposed to the more common process of a party primary where one person from each party makes it through, or with ranked choice voting, where people mark their choices in order of preference. This sets us up for a situation, which has happened before, where a party can get a majority of votes in a race overall, yet be locked out of the general election.
Come on, Democrats, get it together. Yes. Come on.
I still think that Dave is going to eke this out and make it through to the general election. We'll be curious to hear your takes on that. But Heather, what do we need to do about this top two system? And what do you think about this race moving forward?
Look, we could do a primary system like what a lot of other states do, where you declare your allegiance to a party, and that's where you vote for the top candidates in the party. I like the top two. I think it makes things interesting, but I don't want things to be this interesting, this dramatic. Like, this is a little bit too much even for me. And I think part of this is the Democratic Party nice, where they're super nice to each other and they don't want to push each other out. And that's why we had a very crowded ballot with all the different Democrats, and the Democrats were doing so well in these other races where there was a more limited field. And here we had too many Democrats running. I mean, Rebecca Saldana dropped out. She was another Democrat who was running. But then we just had a wide variety of choices for people to go for. And we had a ton of independent expenditure money coming in for Kevin Vandeweghe, who I thought was going to be doing a lot better considering how much money was coming in for him on the IE. And Patrick DePoe had the Seattle Times endorsement. Here was somebody who was not really well known, person of color. I thought he was also, he did fantastic for being an unknown person coming in. This was just a mess. Somebody needs to be mean.
Stephen, what do you think here? What happened and what needs to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I should be forthright with folks. Patrick DePoe is a client of the firm, and also now a friend through the course of that campaign. And he is an incredible human being. And I just want to start by saying, like, I still think I'm selfishly about this, like, celebrating how competitive and how close he was to potentially, being our next commissioner of public lands. What that means is the most competitive native candidate statewide for an executive office in our history of our state. And also you could look at the country and count the number of times that's happened on one hand. And so, like, the pressure of being somebody from a reservation with 1,700 people on it and fighting tooth and nail, in many cases against sort of expectations of you're not viable. And like, what that means is pretty thinly veiled code for you're not white. You're not from the community we expect you to be from to be a competitive candidate statewide. You don't have the rich people Rolodex that we expect you to have. So you guys can probably tell I'm still not completely over the emotion of, like, I am so proud of what he was able to do as a person, how close we got. That being said, I struggle with this question of, like, what we do about it, because I don't know that I have an answer that I am okay with. At the end of the day, I do feel like it's worth saying in this race, there was an attempt to, consolidate candidates. And where that applied was almost universally on the few candidates of color in the race. I know, Senator Saldana faced clear pressure. Senator, Doss faced clear pressure. Patrick DePoe placed a lot of pressure to drop out and consolidate because of the very real threat of two Republicans making it through. That there was so much pressure on these candidates of color who frankly have a very strong argument. It is not like they're just running for running's sake. There are big differences between their views on issues, particularly on the issue of environmental justice, and Councilmember Updegrove's. Now, he's got a general election campaign. Hopefully, I do think he will pull this out in the end by a couple hundred votes. And it was way too close for comfort. And that's so frustrating. But there are differences. There are differences about how we prioritize issues. Is it just about the sort of complete this is shorthand, I'll say, like, white progressive environmentalist issues? Or are there other issues of equal importance? Tribal sovereignty, how we uplift marginalized communities, and a record of doing that. And I think that's a real part. Like, there was a reason people supported Patrick DePoe and Saldana and others, and it was not just for vanity. These were not vanity campaigns. I'll say one last thing before I stop talking, which is, if you want me to tell you what I think we really should do about it, frankly, like, my question is, as a party, why did we fail to have, like, an actual effective voter turnout program in the primary? Voter turnout in King County was way too low. And frankly, if voter turnout in King County was 5 points higher, this would not be a close race at all. like Up the Grove would be ahead by 10,000 votes, and we would not be sweating it. But because we saw among the lowest voter turnout in King County in like decades for a presidential year election, that has led to this possibility for Republicans to win. So that's my take. I think we should invest in, primary voter turnout programs as a party. That's my answer to this top two problem, not how do we get people of color to drop out of the race.
Yeah,
well, just to be clear, I was not talking about them.
I did not mean to apply that at all.
No, I'm talking about Kevin. Go ahead, Rial. Sorry.
I think when you say not being nice, the not nice guy was the one in the lead, and like the one who played the least nice of the three major Democrats, or four if you consider, and five if you consider Rebecca and Mona Doss that dropped out. This, I don't want to take too. I'm going to try and make this quick, but like this reminds me of a story I've had because I've had so many candidates of color that have challenged the system and challenged the status quo against other white Democratic candidates. I get these emails all the time from like either the candidate themselves or a local donor or influencer. And this happened particularly. One is Carolina Mejia when she was running a primary with two other white males in the Democratic primary, and we got a message from the largest donor in the county, saying like you need to drop out, pretty much, because like we're going to risk having two Republicans in the general, same situation. And of course, like the two white guys went after Carolina, said you need to drop out. Like you're the most unlikely, and lo and behold, Carolina won. I was rooting for Patrick too. I've known Patrick since high school. He's a great guy.
Yeah, he was saying that. I had no idea you guys knew each other. It's so cool.
He used to know my older brother back in the day, and so like it was very. I think he ran a great race, and so I think I was very pleased to see like him doing that well. The thing is, it's just like, why is it on him to drop out when it's like, I think it's just I don't know. It was just I've seen these politics. I've seen these types of words they try to push out and consolidate, and Up the Grove is actually notorious for it. And so.
Well, good points. Both of you guys make very good points, and you're right. Now I'm reconsidering the way that I said that, because the being mean tends to fall down on people of color and women, and particularly women of color. Right? That's where the pressure really comes down. So, fair points. I think I was thinking about being mean, me being mean.
Yeah. No, I think that those are both fair points. And I think there's another element in here too. I think among Democratic campaigns overall, outside of this race, but in primaries where you need to draw a contrast just in a general race. And I think that there is often a hesitation to do that. But I do think it has to be said in this race, because it is being said all around that there are conversations that need to be had within the community of Democratic and progressive allies about how we recruit for these races, how we talk about these races, how we talk about who is and isn't viable. I have personally heard several times, I've been in rooms and have had to correct and have heard that this, these types of conversations still continue, where, there are candidate recruitment efforts, and you hear reference to, man, this person's the ideal candidate. It's like a white guy business owner. It's like a white military veteran, and it's all gets back to kind of middle-aged white guy there, and we have some excellent middle-aged white guy candidates. This is not to say that they're bad across the board, but to suggest that the community won't rally around them, won't turn out for them is false, and it's offensive, and it's actually hurting us in elections. Because if we look beyond the past decade, women of color, led by Black women, have outperformed other candidates, period. Like, that is it. They have outperformed in terms of final result. They've outperformed in terms of turnout. If you want to win a race in a swing district, we have examples in our legislature right now. Run a woman of color, run a Black. Like, when you talk about ideal candidate, those are the candidates who are flipping these seats and turning out people who have not turned out before. So Wow.
See Emily Randall, CD6.
I was literally about to just say that. It's like, if you want to talk about how we flipped, right? Like her origin story is flipping a district that was held by a Republican in a very tight race, you know, with, I think it came down to like 60 votes the first time around. How do you get it done? You don't run the white, moderate business owner. You run the gay Latina, like who works at Planned Parenthood. That's how you win.
Yeah, also, but win what though? In a way, like this is funny. I don't want to be the naysayer because we've used a strategy. And the thing is, corporations and conservatives have hijacked this strategy, and then we get people like Eric Adams and Bruce Harrell, and just because they're people of color, think they're going to like do the right thing, then they end up being just corporate stooges, whether just with with a different colored face. So it's just like, I think that we need to be very careful of that, because then they become a shield for our white allies in the community to actually give valid criticism, because then they get labeled as racist. So I think, like the chamber has the perfect shield right now with Bruce Harrell in Seattle and other, you get that with all and Eric Adams in New York, and I can go a list of like there's video essays done on this by like these about how just how they have hijacked the DEI language, and it's become it's become this different conversation, because like now it's just divided us in a way, because like now how do we attack Bruce Harrell from the left when we can have we can't even have a valid, legitimate white progressive candidate to go after him that's actually probably be better for Black communities, because he ain't done anything for the Black community since he's been in office. So I think,
as the person who worked for Lorena Gonzalez, who was attacked, and she was attacked as racist when she criticized him.
Exactly.
So, yes. Yeah, she's a woman of color.
So I think that we got to be very careful about like, we want to put these people out, but like we still got to vet our own people too.
Yeah, we absolutely do. And I think what I appreciate about us and the conversations that we have, it's, yes, we're political consultants and we're working on elections, but I think we all recognize that the point of that is to get people in who pass good policy, who help people, who see and serve their communities. And if that policy doesn't come with it, then it's all for naught, ultimately. Winning a race is just the beginning. And there's a lot of work to be done following that. Well, that is the Commissioner of Public Lands race. Let's talk about governor for a little bit. We have Bob Ferguson. We had a little saga of the Bobs Ferguson for a while there. We got past that. Bob Ferguson finished with 40. Where am I at? 45.16% right now. And Dave Reichert, 27.39%, which is a challenging, result, underperformance for a Republican. There were lots of candidates on the ballot. The kind of also ran Democratic candidate was Mark Mullet, who for all of his time in the Senate and all of his runs for office is now at 6% of the vote. Semi Bird on the Republican side, a more Trump MAGA aligned Republican, is at 10.6%. So Bob Ferguson, Dave Reichert going through to the primary. Did any of you find anything notable in this race?
Well, Stephen, you work for Mullet, right? Tell us what you think.
No, actually, I didn't. My firm did, though. That's a fair point. But small distinction for me, because I've also been on the opposite side of advocating for stuff that Mark Mullet stopped for like a decade at this point. So that was a tough one for me. But setting that point aside, I will say like that race is interesting for a lot of reasons. I mean, I'm a little disappointed that I know like Hillary Franz obviously was in the race for a little bit. I'm bummed that we didn't have a real primary, because I think there are issues I'd love to hear stronger from Bob. Like, I don't really know his position on progressive taxes. From what I've seen in public safety issues, like he's actually been really moderate in the way that he's positioned himself in this primary. That was a little surprising to me. So like there are some of those issues that I wish that we had like a little bit more litigation of he's going to be our governor now for the next like 12 years. I would love to have like heard just a little bit more from him about where he stands on some of these things. Like he hasn't run a really competitive race in, I don't know, 3 decades or something like that. So it's been a while. But I don't know. I mean, overall, it's not a completely surprising race. Like Reichert is a completely untenable and very weak candidate. I don't think he can consolidate his own base. He's had, bad votes on abortion as a congressman. Like he will never win in Washington state. And that is a foregone conclusion. So not an extremely surprising election, really.
What do you think, Heather?
Oh, I got to poke at Steven, so I'm done. Rial, what did you think?
I forgot. Is Mark Mullet? Did he give up his Senate seat this year?
He did.
So we're done. So we're done with him. So like you don't have to waste any more time on him. I actually, full disclosure as well. Both me and Steven helped Dave Reichert get in office. Well, not me more so. We were both working at the Alliance for Gun Responsibility, and he was the Democrat in the 5th LD, and he won by 400 votes, and we knocked thousands of doors in his neighborhood.
Yeah, you meant Mullet.
You meant
right?
Mullet.
Sorry, yeah.
You said Reichert.
We knocked doors for Mullet back
Mullet.
in, whatever. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so
I did too.
All of us did. All of us.
We all did.
We put a ton of resources to get that guy in office, and he turned into the Joe Manchin of Washington. And,
Hey, I tried to make it up. I did ballot curing for Ingrid. We got pretty close. Like I tried to, play my moral compass.
It's like
there,
he's been like my biggest sore. Like, hey, like we helped this guy get in office, and then now he turns like this, and I'm so glad to just be done with him. So no more time.
I brought a Teamster truck into Mark Mullet's district to phone bank for him when I worked for the Teamsters. Yeah, I totally agree. Well, I think it's interesting. Like this is back to the public land seat, right? Where we have these 2 very conservative senators who the Democrats are really, the caucus is not so secretly very happy to get rid of because they drag a lot of their priorities down that they don't even make it out of rules or much less to the floor because a lot of these two senators shit on everything. Excuse me. I hope that doesn't get you banned. So in some ways, that's another reason why the Democrats weren't telling these guys to get out, because it was the sacrifice they had to make to get them out of the legislature.
Yeah, I think, for this one, that there is a bright spot, and then they're out of the legislature. We've got Vandeweghe, we've got Mullet, who are no longer there. Some notable things for me, both in that commissioner for public lands race and in this governor's race, is how much money was spent to get this many votes by those moderate candidates. To have, over $700,000 in that commissioner of public lands race and IE money to wind up under 10% in this race where the base was already so fractured and that money evidently evaporated. The money that Mark Mullet spent in this gubernatorial race, and I think about all of the other candidates, about so many people who came so close across the state, and just that resource allocation there, and I think their analysis, the analysis that the Mark Mullet Vandeweghe prototype is somehow in demand, and especially with Trump, people want someone in the center who's going to do, like, that theory has been tested and failed so many times, and I am just waiting for the day that we can move on from that. If that is part of someone's authentic story and they're fighting for the community, great. But if your whole thing is, I'm not a progressive like them, I'm the responsible moderate and I can get along with Republicans, the Democratic base, there's no appetite for that. There's no excitement about that. That is not turning people out. That is failing spectacularly. So we can move on. We can move on from that, in my opinion.
It's a new era.
It is a new era. Also, just want to see if anyone has any thoughts on the Attorney General's race that sees, that's on the Democratic side, Nick Brown facing Monka Dhingra, for Democrats kind of battling it out to face the Republican Pete Serrano in the general election. Nick Brown is making it through. We've talked about on the show before. I think he ran and is running a fantastic campaign. You talk about someone who's just getting out to every corner of the state, talking to voters, meeting people where they're at, and really not being afraid to talk about many of the issues there. But I also personally still have a tremendous amount of respect for Manka Dhingra, her leadership in the legislature, finding a way to still push for improved legislation while navigating that caucus is not easy, and she has done it very well, I think, for what the job was in front of her and what she's working with there. So I appreciate her run, and I'm excited that she's going to be back in the legislature working on behalf of the residents of the state. Anything notable in that race?
Yes, thank goodness we are not losing her. And I think what's interesting here is back to the state's rules about fundraising when legislature is in session. So Manka was under a freeze while the legislature was in session. She couldn't do any fundraising at all. And Nick Brown was able to go out there and fundraise. And so Manka came in with $250,000 of her own money late to try to make up that difference in terms of fundraising. I think it was too little too late at that point. Because during the session, Nick I saw him everywhere. He was at every event. One time I saw him at 2 events in one day. There he is again. By the way, changed clothes, looks spiff, fantastic. So I think there is some level of what we're seeing here is that people from the legislature who are running are handicapped is not the right word, but are not coming in with the full level that other candidates are against them. And I think the legislature is going to start reconsidering whether or not they can fundraise during session because of that.
Yeah, it's certainly a structural challenge. It's a disadvantage for people who, it's not just candidates. Sometimes it's people working within departments. And so it's a big challenge that sometimes prevents us from fielding the strongest field of candidates. Rebecca Saldana certainly was put at a disadvantage by having to handle her responsibilities to legislate and govern and being prohibited from raising funds at those times. But I think this is set up for a very strong general election by Nick Brown. Is certainly going to have a lot of issues that are top of people's minds and that are used to people seeing the AG handle. I think Bob Ferguson is really passing the baton to him in a great way. We saw him being so active against the Trump administration, and the contrasts at stake here are very stark. And so, quite a case that he has to make. And I think that connects with a lot of people. Now, I
just have one little thought I wanted to share about. I just wanted to echo what Heather was saying, though, because as you were saying it out loud about the sort of fundraising freeze, it's a good point that none of the state senators or representatives that were then trying to go for higher office, for the exception of Emily, was actually able to do that effectively, right? Like Kevin had a really bad showing. Like we said, Mark Mullet did as well. Rebecca Saldana, because of those fundraising challenges, left the race as well. So it definitely is not a good stepping stone for better or worse, certainly for statewide office. And I think that's a really phenomenal point. And in some ways, right, the Randall example is like an exception it's in multiple ways, right? Because Hillary had also just spent all of her time fundraising for governor and then couldn't transfer that money over. So there wasn't a fundraising advantage when then she eventually ran for Congress. That also happened later in the cycle where Kilmer, retired or announced his retirement after the legislative session. So she didn't have to come up against somebody who was able to raise money for that race while she was in session. But Stephen,
go ahead. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Randall could still raise for a federal seat.
Oh, you're right.
Right? So
you're so right.
They can only run for federal seats, but not for state seats. Yeah.
Totally right. I just think it was a good point to emphasize that. I think this is a reality that, unfortunately or fortunately, state level, ledge level office is not a good stepping stone for higher level office. Maybe it's a good stepping stone for federal office potentially, but that's about it.
Look at Jayapal. Yeah.
And I also just think, Nick, my little hot take about the general election for Nick Brown is it actually is it's a fun matchup about gun violence prevention. So Nick Brown was the legal counsel for Initiative 1639 when I was running that campaign. He was one of the folks that really worked hard to write that initiative when it was a bill in the legislature, and then as a ballot measure, Pete Serrano, his general election opponent, famously sued that initiative and a number of gun violence prevention initiatives. So you actually kind of have this matchup in the general election that is rooted in kind of a history of obviously Nick Brown won that legal case. I do think he's going to win this election case, but it's a fun piece of history I don't think people are aware of. So.
Absolutely. Now I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about a significant election, special election, really, that we're seeing in the city of Seattle for the Position 8 citywide race. This seat was originally held by Teresa Mosqueda, very popular city council member who was, because she was so popular, elected to the King County Council. After that created a vacancy, and a candidate that actually lost to Tammy Morales, Tanya Wu, was then appointed to fill that seat by her colleagues, a number of the new council members that are ideologically aligned with her. That was quite controversial to appoint someone that just lost to one of their colleagues to the council, but they did that. They then went on to, attempt to lower the pay up minimum wage legislation for gig drivers, potentially lower the minimum wage for tipped service workers, and prevent a long negotiated raise from taking effect, trying to defund community-based, equity-based initiatives within the city. A lot of things that they didn't quite talk about when they were running for election. There were some polls that came out in the interim that showed that, particularly for Tanya Wu and Sarah Nelson, that their approval ratings were tanking, while support for things like progressive revenue, alternative response, things that the council basically said we are not going to do, those are still polling sky high. They said, that poll is rigged, it's skewed, that doesn't matter. And then in this election result, we had Tanya Wu, the incumbent, facing really three active challengers: Sonatina Sanchez, Tarek Youssef, and Alexis Mercedes Rink. Alexis consolidated a lot of the Democratic kind of allied support behind her, whether it was from endorsements, organizations, unions. Most of them flocked to Alexis, and in a result that we don't really see very often in Seattle, we had the incumbent, Tanya Wu, who is now at 38.3%, and the challenger, Alexis Mercedes Rink, over 50% right now. 50.1% with Sonatina Sanchez, 4%, Tarek Youssef, 3%, and Saul Patu, 3%. So I guess, starting out here, Heather, what do you think is going on with this race? What was notable to you in seeing such a big number in a competitive, low turnout primary with Alexis Rink getting over 50%?
I really want to hear what RIALL has to say, because RIALL worked for Tammy Morales and helped to beat Tanya Wu. RIALL, what do you think?
I didn't work for Tammy last year. I worked for her first election. I didn't.
Oh, that's right.
I haven't done candidates since 2021.
Well,
so,
congratulations.
I did help, as help, whatever I could, it was volunteer for Tammy. I mean, Tammy was near and dear to me because she took a chance on me and my company when we were brand new, and she was our biggest client at the time. So I'm glad to see she won. Beat Tanya, and Tanya's got to go 0 for 2. I think this year. So, and I think it's just the Seattle's where people go with momentum. The news cycles are so skewed to whatever, they get trendy, And you get to these whole where it's like, and you see this nationwide. I live in LA now. I see the same thing where it's like you show one video of a store getting robbed and they say it's a crime wave, and they blame it's that one district councilwoman of color you got, that why, you know, in Capitol Hill and Rainier Beach, why your store in Ballard got robbed. Like, it's just, you know, it's crazy to think this when people don't realize, like, we've had the same corporate bot mayor for the last 20 years of just clone after clone, you know, that has all, I mean, like 80% of the power in the city, and the council is really not that influential as they think, but they love to make scapegoats. So now, like, it was always Shama or Tammy, but now it's just Tammy that they made the scapegoat. She was really under fire. Now they don't, you know, like, I think the city's seeing like that now that the corporate has pretty much wholly assimilated the council into their entities, and so now, like, they have to take responsibility of all the problems that they've said that they're going to fix, which they're not. So, like, I think that's kind of reflection on that overall, and say, like, people, and then who, you know, people in the city where it's like, well, like, who is Tanya Wu? Like, they don't know. She hasn't done anything since she got in. She hasn't been, granted, she hasn't been that long, but like, she didn't earn the seat. She lost her race and then got appointed. I think, like I said, the momentum was swinging. And I think it's swinging back away from that, because it swung to the middle right, you know, like in Seattle, and that's why you had all these corporate candidates win last year. And now I think it's getting back. You're going to see some progressive momentum coming in this year, and I think, you know, Alexis has done a great job of consolidating that, of all the, you know, the stakeholders in that, and, you know, got a solid win. And I think it's going to carry over into the November. I think she's running a very solid. A solid city race. She's doing everything right from what I see.
I think that's right. And you know, certainly just today, just hours ago, the council did a number of things that upset a number of different people in a number of different types of constituencies around the city. So certainly, you know, this is a reflection, I think, of the council's misreading of their mandate and a misalignment there. But I don't want that to overshadow that you don't get a result of 50% as a challenger in a primary unless you're also articulating a positive vision that people are really getting behind. This, you know, my read of it was that it wasn't simply a vote against the council. It was also a vote for Alexis and the vision that she's articulating for helping people in the city, for right sizing the budget, for making sure that people are paying their fair share, particularly corporations, and that, you know, a strong social safety net is really important to Seattle residents. And she is talking about that boldly and proudly. And you know, it's probably a good place also right now to talk about the 43rd legislative district race that had, you know, we talk about, you know, my goodness, 50% being a great result in the 43rd legislative district race, which is a part of Seattle. Sean Scott is just under 60% right now, 59% at the moment. And he faced a couple of moderate to conservative challengers, Andrea Suarez, who's kind of notorious as
it's the notorious Andrea Suarez.
Yes,
the Democrat,
who calls herself a Democrat, but has you know, took a lot of heat for fundraising. You know, being willing to fundraise for Republicans, being aligned with some very controversial figures. They say that they're you know, getting down on the ground and helping people who are homeless. Critics of that say that they are in fact not doing that. They're contributing to kind of the exploitation and poverty porn that we're seeing, and really using them as a scapegoat to drive in culture war issues. And this don't really seem to be aligned with Seattle. The majority on the council helped to campaign for Andrea Suarez. You know, they were out there, you know, there are pictures with her, they're supporters of her, but she actually didn't wind up even with the Seattle Times endorsement. That went to Daniel Carasello, who was relatively unknown, had some affiliations with Republicans before, you know, kind of messaging as somewhat more pragmatic and moderate. He wound up with 16%, Andrea Suarez at 20%, Tashawn Scott 60%. And again, certainly I think that candidate quality or lack of quality is at play here. These were not very strong candidates for this open seat that's being vacated by Frank Chop, except for Sean Scott, who, again, really articulated a vision in a bold and enthusiastic way to say, we're going to take care of people. We're going to put community first, and really driving that home. And so this is not his first race, but he built a lot of credibility and leveraged that and is running on that now. So, looking at what Sean Scott's talking about, and obviously the community is responding to what Alexis is talking about, Alexis Rink, and people responding to that. What do you think this says for, I guess, this election and the general election, and what's on deck for the legislature, the Seattle City Council, and what lessons they should be taking from this?
Well, first of all, let's just applaud Sean Scott. So Sean Scott works really hard. Again, that guy is everywhere. He's been everywhere for years. He's worked really hard in that district. He ran for state legislature, had a really tough race, didn't win it, but did a really great job. So first of all, just applause to him. Secondly, he ran for council, Stephen just reminded me, not legislature, getting confused. But secondly, I was really surprised to hear Stephen say that King County primary turnout was low, because I felt like Seattle and I didn't look at the numbers, so I'm just kind of talking, but Seattle primary turnout felt to me that the progressives actually turn out because they're excited about they're ready to vote for the presidential election now. They're excited about the new ticket. They're pumped up. They turned out. So I think that's part of why we saw progressive results in city council. And I think also in the 43rd, why we saw those results. I think also RIALL is 100% right. Pendulum swings, and the pendulum is swinging backwards, and voters are starting to realize that what they voted for was not the idealism that this DSA chamber slate has been selling.
I just want to throw out one other piece there, which is just that, like, the pendulum has swung. I think that's true. I also think it's important to point out that this council got elected with extraordinarily disparate financial numbers. Like, they benefited from independent expenditures that were in some cases double or triple what both candidates collectively, raised. Whereas the more progressive candidates did not get any real financial support from independent expenditures. If you go back in time to 2019, there was a lot more equality in that outside money. There was, CAPE at the time that was literally in opposition to the Chamber of Commerce that was spending this historic money. And it was way more money than we've really ever seen in a Seattle City Council election from the corporate side, but it was at least matched somewhat on the progressive side by a combination of funders. In 23, we saw just the corporate side spend money, and we saw the progressive side spend almost nothing. I think the only person they really spent any money at all for was Councilmember Strauss. And that is it. So I don't know that there actually is a real mandate for this council. I think we as progressives just ceded the ground to them and let them compete with, I'll borrow, I guess, 12 men on the field instead of 11, for a football reference, I guess. But that's to me the story. And then, looking at this election, I just think it's important to say as well, like what you said is, Heather, that, Sean ran before and lost. And maybe sometimes as a candidate, like, that feels like the end of the world. But I just think that's such a powerful message, particularly young candidates of color, just young candidates in general. Like, winning is awesome. Sometimes losing is important too. And that he, fought that really hard race and then kept working his ass off until then. Now he's got this just like, I think a pretty historic, first time win as a candidate is really cool. And I hope that, like, as a consultant, as I try to get more, young folks of color to run for office, he's really a model. I think he's blazing a path that says you can do this, you can win, you can take on, that challenge. And that's really cool to me.
I think Sean is running a great race, and I'm proud to say he's a client. I don't even charge him really, because it's like he does everything himself. I have nothing to do with Sean. I just say, yeah, call this, here's a list. That's pretty much it. and he wanted to do everything himself. He's been, and it's puts that burden on himself, and it's great because he hasn't really stopped running since 2019. And I see that with him and Alexis. They've been campaigning for longer. They put in the work before this race even started. They had the well intention. I think the other candidates behind it, they just kind of decided to run, which can happen. You can win. Sometimes you get when the right opportunity is right. But when you got someone as strong as Sean or Alexis, and you try to step in the race late, and they've already put out the work and build those alliances, got that support early, it's a very hard, tough wall to crack. So I think, and it's kudos to them. It's not an unfair advantage. I think it's just like they had the foresight to get that work in, build that support early, and build that foundation. And I think Sean, did it even longer than Alexis. So I think, to bring this up, I think, we've talked about this before. Me and Steven, like when Kate put that money in, they put up over $900,000, I think, for progressives. They won 3 seats. They flipped 3 seats. They would have flipped Sean's seat if they put money behind him. I think it goes back to Crystal's point of the disparity in investors. When progressives do put up money, there's a huge disparity in racial equity when they put up $900,000 and only 23,000 of that went to candidates of color and 900,000 went to the white candidates that they supported. So I think that's fortunately, they really can't do that this year because the 2 main candidates in Seattle running that, or the only Seattle City Council progressive is a woman of color. So they have to back her. But when Seattle gets their, when the stakeholders on the left get their stuff together, I think they still need to be conscious of their own internal bias when they do that, so they do it right. Sean Scott should have been running for re-election last year in City Council. That's why
That's so true. I just want to point out one tiny thing on that too, which is that it's not clear to me that Alexis necessarily is going to have an independent expenditure. And I think that matters. That's as political consultants, I'm just putting that out into the ether. You better believe Tanya Wu's supporters are going to have zero hesitation putting $300,000 into the general election. I have no doubt in my mind that the Realtors Association, that those groups are going to come together and make that happen. And is that enough to flip the election result? I don't know, but it is important to put out there into the world. I'm a little selfish because I am working on trying to, make some of this happen. But we need to be serious about this and not let her get crushed by outside spending, because we think we have it in the bag and voters are on our side. So sorry, that sounds like you wanted to add.
No, I think that's.
Yeah. Well, I think, and also you look at the 3 candidates, going back to 2019, the 3 candidates they spent money on, Herbold, Strauss, and Lewis. Look what happened. Did they stay progressive? Did they stay? So no. So I think, and Sean Scott did. So I think so I think we, like I said, it's just where we put this money. I think the values need to be aligned and need to matter. So I think we just need to just make sure that this money comes with integrity as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think another important thing to take away from this is how you set yourself up to legislate and govern successfully. I think we see 2 different models here at play on the council. We saw these, the new crop of council members who were elected last year, who didn't answer a lot of questions, or who didn't come down conclusively on one side or another. Hey, do you support progressive revenue? Well, I'll have to look at it. I'm interested in learning more. What do you think about the police contract? We'll have to get together and talk about it. And it was all of these. I will have to talk to community. We'll get everyone together and see. But nothing definitive. And in the direct voter communications, the mail, the ads, most of them were parroting progressive talking points. So, the regular people who don't pay attention to politics every day and track this stuff regularly heard things that they didn't find to be offensive. But people who were tuned in knew that wasn't an authentic representation of who they were, where they were coming from. And so then they take office and they start this campaign of doing the things that they really wanted to do, but they didn't run on that stuff. So the public went, whoa, what are you talking about? Lowering the minimum wage? What are you doing? Like, what are you talking about? You didn't say this. We didn't want this. And there's just this dissonance. And then that, concerned them with the pushback. They withdrew a number of their proposals. And so they're kind of stuck in this place where they ran and said things to give the impression that they were more progressive than they actually were. Their donors want a return on their investment that they did there. And, they're waiting for results, and they can't do anything now without taking a lot of heat because they were not forthright about what they were going to do. So no matter what they do, it makes people unhappy. Whereas you have Alexis, you have Sean, who are saying, hey, I am absolutely in favor of this. You like me, I'm going to fight for this. And realistically, that's why Shama was basically Teflon, regardless of the recall campaigns, the challengers that were very well funded and put up against her. She was absolutely transparent about what she planned to do. She fought for the people in her district. She represented that district, and they trusted that she was doing what she said she was going to do. She was fighting her. There was no one who was surprised about anything that she was doing. And I think that is how you give yourself a mandate to really make progress. I'm really excited to see how this can turn out, and I hope more candidates take a lesson from that.
Tammy Morales for mayor.
I do, we're a little short on time. I want to talk about these initiatives. They're a very, very big deal. These statewide initiatives that we're going to see on our November ballots that are an effort from this MAGA Republican hedge fund mega millionaire. I don't know if he's a billionaire, 100 mega millionaire. And really an attempt to kind of defund government, push these culture wars through these initiatives, kind of bottomless pockets when, in this situation, they're dealing with it. And they're basically trying to undo a lot of the progress on climate action, on allowing people to age in place with long-term care. A lot of the progress that we have made, that people have been reelected on, that has broad public support. They're saying, yeah, we want to undo all of that. Heather, what's at stake here with these initiatives, and what needs to happen to make sure that these are not successful?
So full disclosure, I'm working on two of them. Our team is working on both defeating I-2109, which is to take more than $2 billion away from childcare and education by giving a tax break to the super rich, and 2124, which is to take away long-term care insurance from people who have serious illnesses, disabilities, or are aging. Really fun, nice stuff. 2117, which is to cut billions in funding for transportation, firefighting, and other really important projects that are important to stopping climate change. So all kinds of really great things here, promoted by Brian Haywood, who is a mega millionaire who moved here recently. Also has a gazillion-dollar home in Japan. He goes back and forth. And when he comes here to Washington State, he acts like he wants to run for governor. And this is what he's doing, is running these big initiatives. Now, here's the good news. The good news is that these are all polling most of them are polling horribly. Initiative 2109 particularly is 62% no. Again and again and again, in poll after poll after poll, it's done. It's going to be defeated. And this is the one that Haywood really cares about him a lot, because it's a tax cut for himself. 2117 also is polling no, 57% no, and 2124 is polling 50% no, 52% no. They are usually, the conventional wisdom is on initiatives, and you all know this, right? The conventional wisdom is, if you are trying to get yes on an initiative, you got to start at above 50. And you got to start maybe at 60, because people tend to know. So right now, these initiatives are losing, which is great news for us. 2066 is the last one that you mentioned, and that one is the one to limit consumers' ability to get electrification and to take away protections against again greenhouse gases.
Yeah.
Is this a hard fight? Yes. Yes, it's a very hard fight, but at the moment, the polling is looking pretty good.
Now, there was some reporting on polling that showed some of them may have decent prospects for passage. How did you read that, and is that accurate?
So that was the Seattle Times and a polling firm where they only read part of the ballot initiative, or sometimes they didn't read the ballot initiative at all. They just kind of made up fictional language that they thought summarized the ballot initiative, not what voters will actually see. They didn't have the legally required financial impact disclosure on there. And so they just made up ballot initiative language, read it to voters, and then came back and gave the polling numbers. But polling that actually polls the actual language that voters will see shows that these lose.
That's a really important point, because really you're trying to replicate the conditions under which people are going to be voting, both the messaging environment and what they're doing. So people see the voter guide statement, they see the question on the ballot, they're reading the question on the ballot. One of the most basic fundamental things that you want to do is ask the question as it's going to be on the ballot. You have to do that at least at some point in the poll. Generally, it's really hard to get good, actionable, useful information when you don't do that. Curious choice to not do that. That's a pretty like,
it's super interesting.
You're going to ask one question, it's actually that question, so that's not even like 2 or 3 down the list. Curious choice not to do that. But
I mean,
yeah.
you want to anyway. So I mean, there's all kinds of analogies I could make here, but here's the thing: when we asked the reporters, when we said, why did you allow this to happen? Because these are smart people at the Seattle Times who are allowing this to happen. They said the polling company told them it was too many words. But it was a digital poll, y'all.
Interesting. Well,
so it wasn't like somebody was reading it out loud.
Yeah, I think this is, there's a lot at stake, and really what we're seeing is a result of the residents of Washington continue to elect Democrats to our legislature and to these statewide positions. Republicans have not been able to effectively make a case to voters to get elected to office. That is not an avenue for Republicans to advance policy. So this is kind of, the route that they're taking now. They, don't have anyone viable enough. Their ideas do not connect with the public. They can't pass them legislatively. But hey, they have Daddy Warbucks coming, with the cash, and he can, fund these initiatives. And it really would be rolling us back, setting us back. We're like, climate change is here. We've got to mitigate the effects. We're dealing with wildfires, the challenges that come with them. We're dealing with trying to mitigate the impact on our water and our air. We're trying to make sure that we have safe places for people to live, whether it being in their neighborhoods. And that is all going to be undone. If these pass. The affordable child care, the social safety net that we value here would literally be undone. So, I mean, there's a lot of numbers involved in these things. They kind of did make it easy. And this is all part of a unified effort. And people just need to vote no. Initiative, just vote no. Vote no on those statewide initiatives on the ballot as part of this, kind of backhanded attempt at overreach, and the only way that they can do it's really challenging. Did you have some thoughts, Rial?
Plenty, because this is like I live and breathe initiatives, and definitely not these ones. I turn these down pretty easily. I think also we know that there were 7 initiatives. There were 3 others. And our Democratic legislature passed 3 of them like that. So I think, half their job got done. So he's already kind of getting his money's worth already because of our failure in Olympia. So yeah, voting on all these are trash. It's Republican policy, and it's pretty simple. But like the Republicans nationwide, I've seen this trend nationwide, figuring out that they can run initiatives too and get these passed. We see, like, in Walmart funded a pro-prison initiative last year. They funded, the Chipotle funded anti-workers one, fast food workers one. The oil companies did another similar one for Cal. They're going to be on the ballot this year in California. And it's just, and there's literally taking money from schools to fund prisons this year. It's funded by Walmart. And so because they have, you don't have to get 50% of the people to sign these initiatives. You only have to get 8% to sign them, to qualify them. So it's if you have the money, it's easy to do. You can really spin these really easy on the ground. So the fact that they're on the ballot, it's not a heavy lift if you have the funding. If Democrats have the funding they could pass 20 initiatives, people would vote for them because they're issues actually that they talk about but don't actually pass in legislature poll very well. They could pass these, but we just don't ever put the money behind them. So I think like this, qualifying and passing are different things. So I think someone's convinced Brian Haywood, and hopefully he ends up wasting a lot of money by getting these failed, and because it costs a lot to get on the ballot. Qualifying is up to the people. I think it's going to, hopefully they all fail.
Now we are about to close. We had planned on talking about a number of other races, but I guess just real quick, what are the top races that you're watching moving into the general election? We'll start with Stephen.
Yeah, I'll try to give so few. Obviously, the 3rd congressional district. I mean, can we hold that district? Can we potentially? There's really no mathematical path to taking back the House for Democrats that does not include holding that district. So that's obviously a huge race. All of us should be invested in and trying to do. There's a few state legislative races we haven't mentioned. 45th legislative district, position 2. We have progressive challenger, union organizer, and Melissa Demian, who's running against Representative Springer. Full disclosure, I work for Melissa. She came really close in the primary. We're going to have much higher turnout in the general. If she wins, I think this is a great shot across the bow for, progressives to say, if you're an incumbent and you are taking horrible anti-union votes, anti-climate votes, anti-abortion votes, you will lose your seat if a challenger takes you on, even when they're outspent 10-1. I think that is a huge, potentially rippling effect to other races. And then the last one I'll mention really briefly, kind of a hot take, R versus R race in Legislative District 2. So we have in Washington State, progressive state as we are, a literal local leader of a far-right anti-government militia organization, a violent extremist organization that in other states has committed truck bombings against federal buildings, who is leading currently in the primary and will face off against another Republican in the general election out in Yelm and Thurston County. To me, that is like, just as a human, just as a believer in democracy, like I am terrified that we will potentially have a violent extremist as a state legislature. We saw that for a while, and we finally did away with it. Now, my hot take is that as Democrats, we should try to figure out how to prevent that from happening. Anyway, those are the races I'm paying attention to.
What about you, Heather?
I am paying attention to LD14, which is a Latino majority district where Curtis King is running for re-election, but is being challenged by Maria Beltran, who is an amazing activist and community leader in the Yakima area. And although she did not perform as well as one would hope in the primary, I think the primary voters tend more conservative, and I'm hoping that she has big turnout for the general. So that's one that I'm secretly watching. I'm, of course, watching CD6 for my friend Emily Randall. And here in the city of Seattle, really hoping that Tanya Wu finally gets the message and stops trying for Seattle City Council.
Yeah, for me, absolutely second what you said before there. RIALL, any races that you're following in the general?
Of course, be following Sean Scott. I think he's going to win easily, but he is trolling the hell out of his opponent in a genius way, and it's just hilarious to watch. And it's like, I wish I could say I was behind some of the stuff he's saying, but it's just all him, and it's funny to watch. And I'm looking forward to Tanya Wu getting kind of exposed with her, especially with her slumlord tactics that she's been using for life, and seeing that put on full display for the whole city to see.
Yes, certainly. I am paying attention to a number of those. In addition, the 5th legislative district race, that's the Issaquah, like North Bend area, has Victoria Hunt, who made it through a crop of Democratic challengers to face Mark Hargrove, who was districted into this district. He used to be a 47th district representative. Conservative MAGA Republican, but now is in that 5th legislative district race. So challenge there to follow. And then the 42nd district up north with Alicia Rule, the Democrat facing Raymond Paletti, and then Joe Timmons, who is looking strong against Kamal Bachu. So really some close races there. That Larry Springer, Melissa Demian race in the 45th is a big deal, certainly following those. And the Commissioner for Public Lands race, which, may be a competitive race in the general. So we are hoping, I think consensus, Dave makes it through. Guesses there?
Better knock on some wood. I don't know. Knock on a tree. I don't know. Yeah.
I am hoping so.
I do think so. Yeah, I think you're right.
Squeaker, and it could be either way, but to me, it looks like there's enough to squeak through. But we'll continue. Tomorrow's update is going to be pretty determinative to see what that is. With that, this roundtable comes to a close. I want to thank our panelists, RIALL Johnson, Stephen PAOLINI, and Heather WEINER, for their insight tonight and all the work that they do. Like, they are involved in so much. I love working with them on different projects, doing very, very good quality work. To you watching online, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your feedback and questions. If you missed any of the discussion tonight, you can catch up on the Hacks and Wonks Facebook page, YouTube channel, wherever we're at. Special thanks to essential member of the Hacks and Wonks team and coordinator for this evening and all around just excellent human being, Shannon Chang, running things behind the scenes and getting us all coordinated and together. If you missed voting in the election, in the primary election, or know someone who did, make sure to register to vote. You can register to vote, update your registration, or find information for the next election at myvote.wa.gov. As a reminder, even if you've been previously incarcerated, your right to vote is restored, and you can re-register to vote immediately upon your release, even if you're still under community supervision. Very important. Be sure to tune into Hacks and Wonks on your favorite podcast app for our Tuesday topical interviews and our Friday week in review shows, or at officialhacksandwonks.com. I've been your host, Crystal Fincher, and we'll see you next time.